Yes, guys, welcome back to the Cannon podcast. How you doing? With Alexander Moneypenny and my very good friend
George V. That start kind of sounded like me. I thought you were going to go and do the full Canadian impression.
Yes, guys.
Yes,
What do
sir.
I mean by that? So, Miles Lewis Skelly, central running power. No Bhavs today, as you can probably tell. So he's let us off the hook. We're gonna break free, George and I, and chat about the all the stuff we need to talk about. We've got a lot to get through. We should probably start though with that Villa game.
Mm.
Yeah, if you saw the instant reaction on the YouTube channel, yeah, you would have seen that we certainly I had a pretty negative response to it. Not in any kind of bashing the team kind of way, but I felt really down after that game. It was an incredibly frustrating game, and the thing I wanted to start with, George, is like I think in what we do, we always want to be as accurate as possible, and accuracy is often conflated with deepness or depth of analysis or whatever it is. But sometimes I don't think it has to be, and I think in this case, I don't think my main takeaway from Villa is actually it isn't that deep. As much as we want to look for the depth of analysis, and we want to look for the interesting parts and nooks and crannies of all these sorts of things. I do feel with that Villa game, it was as simple as our finishing wasn't good enough. That is really my main takeaway. Yeah, that's how I feel. I don't, there's bits to discuss. There's, we'll talk about the Declan Rice when it comes to some slight changes in the build-up, etc. But I really do feel coming out of that Villa game, the finishing wasn't good enough, and that's about it.
Yeah, I maintain my instant reaction thoughts. It's very difficult to win games when you leave 5 goals on the pitch. I mean, in the first 5 minutes
Yeah.
before the Villa goal happens, Bukayo Saka's weak foot finish, where he normally could even control it. Like, I mean, it doesn't have to be a first-time hit. I mean, he's got the time to take that down and stand up Martinez. But then you look at it, Martinelli had 2 clear 1v1s against Martinez himself. The Odegaard chances are glaring, especially the second half. Actually, the first half, I think he gets more flack than he really deserves. I mean, sure, he should do better. I still think he should take it first time, but that second half finish is actually worse for me than the first one. Just there, 5 off the top of my head. And you cannot do that
Yeah.
at any level, let alone
And there were
against
more.
Villa. And there were more, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that I'm with you there. I do think that we did some interesting tactical switches in Villa, which I must say I was not a huge fan of, but they did produce, I'd say, one of the more dominant chance creation games, I would say, that we've played this season. I think if you just isolate and take away the emotion of the result and what an impact does for us, but you look at just purely the play, the amount of times that we were able to break down Villa both centrally and wide was actually quite encouraging. And we had a good variety of chances. I didn't feel as though it was essentially Saka doing his own thing. And we can have to talk about Declan Rice leaving the center of the pitch, joining the back three, Zinchenko taking a bit more priority in terms of build up, but then also Martin Odegaard doing what he's been doing the last couple of games, but certainly drifting left a lot more. And I think that when you start to kind of branch out and see what was the impact of having Martinelli, Kai Havertz on similar sides, there's a lot of questions that have kind of cropped up for me in the last couple of weeks about Martinelli's usage, how we're maximizing that, the benefit of Kai, who's gaining in role. I think he added the most attacking value and passes of the last game. He's growing, and he's deserved the Player of the Month award, which is something that we could always say is a bonus when your kind of £65 million signing has been left wanting for very specific play. But all in all, I think I walk out of that game actually much more encouraged because of the chance creation. And I think that
Yeah.
on the whole, the attackers this season have actually ironically been clinical. Very tough to say
Yeah.
after this type of match, but the numbers point towards
Yeah.
us being quite clinical with few chances. We had the opposite problem. So I think when you create chances and you don't finish, of course it's a frustration, but it's a smaller problem for me than not creating chances.
Yeah, you just find yourself saying, really, if you don't finish your chances, that's what's going to happen. And the thing is the reason I'm kind of happy to have that conclusion and almost leave it there is because that hasn't been the problem this season.
Mm-hmm.
It really hasn't. If you look at our open play XG compared to the amount of goals we've scored, I think, am I right in saying we're like 1 goal less than last season, or by this point, or maybe it's the same fixtures or something like. I don't know exactly the numbers, but the goal scoring, it might feel as though, and this is a whole other podcast about kind of, I think at times we are slightly looking back on last season with slightly rose-tinted goggles and thinking that everything was just this perfect dream at the beginning of the season, and it wasn't. We lost games, we drew games, we had hairy moments, we weren't always defensively sound. There was a number of issues at the beginning of last season. It's just that we managed to keep a lot of people fit and had a good run. But I think it's almost always compared and seen as this this perfect example of how you start a season compared to what's happening now, and I don't necessarily buy that. That hasn't been our problem this season. Actually, really, we've been extremely clinical, which is why I've been happy to just go, do you know what? That was a poor game. Credit to Villa as well, because look, do I believe playing that way all season long is going to get you in Europe or to the Champions League? Maybe no. Personally, I don't. I think if you look at their, you look at their underlying metrics and all a lot of their underlying numbers, they all kind of point towards at some point a drop off, which is kind of classic Unai Emery, that he's conceding a lot at the back, but he's also managing to deliver up front. The problem is when that equation flips. But credit to them on the day. So yeah, I'm kind of just like happy to not sort of thread this into the weave of our season or whatever you want to say. Like, I don't want to make this feel like and that was the Villa game, which really was the turning point for whatever. That really felt like a sort of an anomaly and something that we don't necessarily need to take too much from. But you wanted to talk about the build-up stuff that you saw with Declan Rice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't agree with it, but it produced our biggest chance creation kind of match, I would say, of the season. So you have to think about it as an option. I would say that Declan Rice as a whole has really found himself in that center of the pitch as a pivot. Even there might be times that he has a partner where Zinchenko does drop in. There's been times when Zinchenko goes out wide, of course, but then like Declan Rice as a whole has either started in the center of the pitch or himself been the one to vacate wide, like Zinchenko at the earlier of the season. One thing that we saw very different against Villa was he joined and he took up Ben White's role in the back three and allowed Ben White to be a lot more, hold a lot more width rather. And instead of having essentially Declan Rice receive in those top zones, you chose Zinchenko, Martin Odegaard, and Gabby Jesus at times dropping in. And so what I think we ended up having was a lot more technical quality on the pitch. But one thing that I didn't quite see was, or rather missed, was those long switches and effectiveness. And I think some of the carrying right now was an issue because we found basically just Jesus being the only carrier within that center of the pitch, because Kai Havertz would run, Martinelli would carry the width, Bukayo Saka wasn't receiving as deep. And so you ended up having kind of these two passers in Zinchenko and Odegaard share responsibilities for creating the buildup, whether it's from the right or from the left, and they both swapped kind of positionings. But Declan Rice as a whole stayed a lot deeper, and he kind of anchored the back line. You can maybe ask, is that because of Ben White's current 1v1 issues? To allow him to be a lot higher up the
or
pitch?
Is that the threat? Sorry to interrupt. Is that the transition threat from Villa?
It could be the transition threat in a sense, but I mean, you've got Bailly on the other side, right? Which I think was probably the bigger threat, and then Moussa Diaby. They definitely have a transition threat, but the one thing that I think I was frustrated with is I would have rather had that stop in the center of the pitch as opposed to necessarily a channel runner, because you basically gambled that Ben White would give you the added benefit in attack down that side. By dropping Declan and you say, I have enough buildup with Odegaard and Zinchenko to carry out of the pitch, you can sacrifice having a Declan in the center of the pitch from a transition control point of view. But you want to see Ben doing a bit more. And I think he struggled, in this match to really affect himself. There was that one chance he tries to chip Martinez, and I think it summed up his night because the technical quality across the entire team, but particularly him, was not great, and it was frustrating to see. But I think that choice to have Zinchenko as kind of the first receiver has been something that we flirted with in the past and in moments, I think, of last season, but it was really prominent in this game. And I think the impact on the team meant that we did see a spike in our chance creation and accessing those areas for sure. But the one thing I didn't feel, at least, was that I didn't get that long switch potential between Martinelli or Bukayo Saka, and especially that first play in the match, that switch that Bukayo should be finishing on his weak foot. We saw it then, and then we didn't see it nearly enough times, except for the offside attempt that Saka makes. Brilliant through ball there, but we didn't see that incision from deep.
Yeah, I think a lot of that first half I was I was frustrated at the balance. And it's not that every ball needs to go, over the back, or every ball needs to be a switch, but it's that fine margin, isn't it, in that balance where it just, I think, just flipped into a little bit too much deep play. Let's leave Villa there. We've got some news to cover. As I say, I'm kind of happy to lead this game in my head personally. I find some of the carry on around Aston Villa a little bit, it's a little bit over the top, and I find a little bit some of the carry on around the game. And I watched a few Aston Villa fan cams, and they were saying we completely dominated them, and I'm like, I don't know what game you watched. I really don't know what game you watched, but it certainly wasn't the game I watched. But anyway, let's move on from Villa. We've had some news about Emile Smith-Rowe. That Emile Smith-Rowe is back in training. We saw a video today of him recording on Monday the 11th, back in training, getting a sort of a warm ovation from the crowd, from the standing players. It's good news. I'm always wary of putting too much on returning players. I think I was chatting to James Alcott about this, and this idea that you want to just take a little bit off. Every player becomes world class in your mind when they're out. But, what could Smith-Rowe provide us? And I think back to that game against Villa and some of the games where we have been frustrated this season. Smith-Rowe's main quality for me, or his primary thing that I think he could be, and if he develops into potentially one of the best in the league at this specific thing, is speeding up a game. When he comes on and knowing when to do that, having the capacity to do that.
The gas pedal.
Timing it well, the gas pedal. Exactly, especially centrally. And I felt really a lot of that game against Villa, actually, we were kind of, again, knocking it around. We've seen that for a number of times. I think when your body has undermined you in that way, and he hasn't been able to do that, we've seen a really impotent Smith-Rowe, really, because his main superpower, the main thing that he can do, has been massively undermined by his body issues. But you never know. So, what are you hoping to see from Smith-Rowe at the end of the season? Do you think he can get back to that point? And also, do you think he has a long-term future?
Shock. I love Emile Smith-Rowe. He has
George Voutsas in Loving Academy. Shock.
Yes, but he has this thing called central running power. So what do I mean by that?
Okay.
No, I think you make a good point about the tempo of a match, and I think that's something that we've struggled with all season, to be honest with you. Not just our build-up tempo, but the idea for more control has meant that I think the team gets lulled into possession and stale possession potentially, and we don't have enough players that change the face of a game. And you can change games in different ways, by the way. It doesn't have to just be through possession, through carrying, through, you can physically move an opponent. You can have an Ivan Toney, a Dominic Calvert-Lewin type that physically moves. Like, you need different facets to change a game. And I think a lot of the reasons that we maybe yearned for Trossard later in the match is what Emile Smith-Rowe might actually give us, but in a slightly different way. What do I mean by that? Is the technical control that he can receive on the half turn, but then receive in crowded areas, draw people in, and then release the ball is something that I think is one of his major superpowers. His ability to carry, I think, is probably among the best in the squad, not just in tight spaces, but the ability to be vertical. That's something that we've really struggled with. I don't think we've struggled with gaining territory, with entering the final third. None of these things for me have been a struggle this season. But one thing that I also think that he gives us is a level of efficiency in terms of creating the big chance, the pass before the pass. And I don't think it's necessarily Emile Smith-Rowe's forte to do between the line passes, but he draws enough opposition in to leave other people out. And we don't have enough of those players taking responsibility in the final third. You can maybe argue Bukayo Saka has had his moments, and then Gabby Jesus is somebody that we all love, but we recognize his touches are inefficient at times. And so I think what he's going to give us is a level of dynamism that we could see on the overlap. He needs to trust his body. I need him to see that. And I think that, people critique his defensive work rate, but for me, I need to see him be aggressive. I want to see him like his debut against Atletico Madrid. I want to see that Emile Smith-Rowe. I don't care that you lose the ball. And I think one of my worries, at least, is because he's been out for so long. He's going to play within himself, be technical, keep it sharp, don't lose the ball, but ultimately unimpactful. What I need to demand from Emile Smith-Rowe is do what you're best at. And, I think Mikel needs to loosen the grips a bit. Part of him is being a maverick, okay? And we have controlled mavericks. This has been a problem for me, and we definitely need to, I think, tweak things, because at the end of the day, we're becoming a little predictable in terms of how we're going to be attacking, and we need that gamble. That one player that is going to give you the qualitative superiority, which is just really the talent or the quality to take the ball in the half turn and carry it into the box. That's what we need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a number of things there. I do wonder, because I think about who are the players in our squad who you really feel like the shackles are off, and I look at someone like Jesus. And I'm like, he feels like one of the only players that feels like he's really working on that balance of instinct.
Mm-hmm.
And I do wonder if, because when Jesus and Arteta met, Arteta was the assistant coach, Jesus was a young player, and that wasn't necessarily decided by him, and he got to show Mikel maybe the instinct and what that instinct can do. Mikel's come in, he's trying to establish his coaching credentials, he's got a young team, and he is going to set very clear parameters, which we needed, by the way, at the time, absolutely needed, and has worked wonders for us. But it's always a balance. There's a constant balancing act. We'll come to balancing acts with Zinchenko, Ben White later. We want to talk about their deficiencies, but it's a constant balancing act between how much freedom you give someone and how much you cover for someone, and is that weakness okay because we can cover it with that? And it's hard to know that. And I think Smith-Rowe is almost the worst player in terms of his skill set to have suffered so many injuries under Arteta, because I think he'll be coming back in, and what he does so well is working with instinct, is working with, do you know what, I'm going to pick up the ball here and I'm going to drive through, or I'm going to
close combination pull out wide at the edge of the box.
This situation, close combination, or we see it, we see that sort of that horseshoe shape around the edge of the box. Someone going, do you know what, I'm going to drive in here, I'm going to attract some players here, and then play a quick 1-2 around the corner and try and get something going. That's when Smith-Rowe's at his best. But if he loses the ball and he's got in his mind, well, if I lose the ball here, Mikel's pulling me off. Yeah, it's a really hard thing, and I do really feel for him, because I feel like his specific skill set is something that maybe Mikel isn't in a place as a coach yet to really allow to sort of fly.
Yeah, and I just think it's what the team needs in terms of, if you're talking central progression, and I hate to be a broken record, but if you're talking that's the problem, then you want somebody that can receive centrally, that can carry and do it with confidence.
Yeah, and it's funny because actually, specifically just talking about Villa, he says, having wanted to put it to bed, but specifically talking about Villa, central access, I didn't think was actually the main problem. I think we actually got a lot of central access. So different games need different things, and I think Smith-Rowe could have been so useful for so many games for us. So look, we'll see. Putting your hat in the ring.
Mm-hmm.
How much longer do you see Smith-Rowe at Arsenal? If you had to say, I think he'll be here for another 18 months, another 6 months, another 10 years, where do you feel that is headed?
Thanks for checking out the Cannon Podcast. To hear the full episode, sign up as a YouTube member on this channel, or go to patreon.com/thecannonpod.